we have a GitHub account where we have a JSON file. We want to validate that that JSON file is always in a good state. And we do that using GitHub workflows, which allows us to run a job every time a file is changed on our main branch. And we always want this job to be green because typically people should open up pull request and verify that their code passes all the tests before they merge it to the main branch. So if someone doesn't do that, then we want to get notified as fast as possible. So why don't connect this to an Axis Strobe and set the color of it based on the status of this CI/CD job? It would be much easier if we just could write our application for the strobe itself and then let the strobe make requests to the GitHub API to get the status and then updates its own color. So let's actually take a look at how we can implement this. Let's go back to our FixedIt Data Agent, since that one can actually be very helpful here. So in the FixedIt Data Agent, you have the ability to create your own scripted workflows for your own use cases that should be handled by the data agent directly on the device. So the way this works is that you can define different kind of inputs, essentially anything you can imagine. And then you define different kind of processing, different aggregators, different filters, and so forth to do transformations to this data that you get from the inputs. And then after that, you push the data to some kind of output. But for this use case, what we want to do is to have an HTTP input, which make a request to GitHub and gets the status of our job. We then want to do a transformation to transform the response we get from the GitHub API to a color that our strobe should show. And then we want to use this color to send it to the VAPIX API, which will actually change the color of the strobe. So I'm going here to the interface of our strobe, and it's sitting here right behind me. You can see that it's currently not lit at all. And here we already have the Telegraph agent installed. And we can see that it's running 7 configuration files. It has some agent configuration telling how often it should do the sampling and so forth. And then it is sending it to an output. In our case, we want to start from scratch. So let's just disable all of this. And now we should see that we get error messages here complaining about that there's no configuration paths or no configuration files to run because we have disabled everything. So let's then start with uploading files. So I have prepared a few different files here with different parts of the workflow, and I chose to keep them separate to make it easier to enable and disable functionality bit by bit to test it. So let's start with the agent configuration. This tells the agent how often should it do the sampling. So in this case, we say every 5th second we should make a request to the API. And if we have a lot of devices, it might be good to add a jitter time. So let's enable this. And if we go to log now, we will see that we don't have any outputs. So every workflow we need to have inputs and outputs. That's the minimum requirements. So let's upload an GitHub input. So this file is making use of an HTTP input, and we have a URL to the GitHub API where I make use of environment variables. We give this data metric a name, and we tell it what fields we should collect. So if we enable this one, and we still need an output, we're going to start with a std_out output just for debugging purposes. This will just write any data in our pipeline to the standard output, which will be visible in the user interface. So there we can see that we get data from our API request. So let's do the transformation to extract the color that we need. We're going to do this with a processing step. In this case, I'm going to use Starlark. It can be used to do custom transformation from messages. So we define a function here that will run for each metric that we get, meaning each API response that we get. And we will just extract the conclusion tag from it. And then we will compare this. We will create a color variable where we set the default value to yellow. And if it's successful, we will set it to green. If it's a failure, we will set it to red. And then we return this new metric. So if we go back to logs now, we should hopefully see that we get a much simpler message here instead. And there we see the simpler message. So now let's add the last interesting part here, which is the strobe output. So this is the one that will take this color value and affect the state of the strobe. And I said before that there is an HTTP output. In this case, we can't make use of that directly because the HTTP output makes some assumptions on how the data format should look like. And the VAPIX API, on the other hand, make other assumptions on how the data that you send to it should look like. And there's no overlap between those two. But with this application, that's not an issue because we always have the exec plugin that we can fall back to, which means that we can just execute a script to do whatever we want to. So in this case, we say that we should execute a script called trigger_strobe.shell. We should only send it the data from the workflow color metrics, which is our transformed color. We should send the data in JSON format. We disable batch formats because normally the Telegraph agent would batch data and send a lot of them in the same request to make sure that you don't get too many requests over the network. So of course, we also need this script. So I'm going to upload a helper file. I'm going to select the trigger strobe script, and I'm going to mark it executable since it should be an executable script. So now we have the script here, and we can take a look at it, and we see that it's a shell script. So this is one important thing to remember. If you're using shell scripts, then you need to be a bit more careful with testing and so forth to make sure that it will be a portable solution that you're creating. And also the way the Axis Strobe is designed, you need to disable the other colors. So if we want to show green, then we disable the yellow and red. If we want to show yellow, then we disable the green and red and so forth. So let's enable this one. And now you should hopefully see the strobe here behind me light up very soon. And yep, there you see a green light from our strobe. So let's now go to our Git repository and see if we can actually make the strobe change color. So I'm going to remove one of the quotes here, which renders this invalid JSON. And if we go to the action tabs, we should see that we get a new job getting started, and the strobe here should hopefully change to a yellow state. And there is yellow. And yeah, there it turns red, indicating that the job isn't passing. So if I reload my page here, we see that it's now a red light in GitHub too. And the last step we would do here is just to disable this continuous logging. So we can do that by disabling the standard output. And now the workflow will continue to work. This was very quick and easy to do this. It's essentially only the imagination that can put limitations on what you can do with these solutions.